This is going to be a controversial video. I recognize that, and I would just like to let people know up front that anything that is disrespectful to me personally will be deleted. Anything that sticks to the subject matter, no matter how hot or how cold it is, will be retained as long as the language is civil. Now, this particular segment on News One Now, the Roland Martin Show, they have titled, "Are Trump Supporters Racist?" I'd like to take that a little bit further. I'd like to take that to the point of saying, are Trump supporters, i.e. Republicans, racist, and are Clinton supporters, i.e. Democrats, racist? And spread it out a little bit further, and you must include the independents because that is the fastest growing segment of the political arena. So I'll say, are independent racist? Group all of those together, and you basically have, is America racist? You're going to see some polls, and I'm going to, I guess, stop at each poll and make a brief comment, and then I'm going to run the Roland Martin segment together. But the problem is that the majority of people within this country, according to the poll, which they're not going to bring that piece of it up, but approximately 78% of the people polled, and I say of the people polled, believe that the discussion of race is a very important issue. A very important issue. Only about 3% of the people polled didn't know whether the discussion of race is an important issue. Approximately 22% of the people believe that the discussion of race is unimportant. All right, I'm going to play the segment now, and then I'll give you comments regarding the particular poll, and then I'll let the panelists make their comments.
We're going to do great with the African Americans. They want jobs. They want jobs. African American youth has a 59% unemployment rate, 59%. Obama has done nothing for African American youth. We are going to do great with African Americans. You watch. You watch.
That's the presumed Republican candidate, Donald Trump, speaking at a rally in Maine yesterday. After pretty much alienating most black voters throughout his campaign, it seems as if Trump now acts like he cares about our community. But many of the billionaire's backers may not be on board. In fact, a new Reuters Ipsos poll reveals most of Trump's supporters hold very stereotypical views of black Americans. Check out the numbers. 48% of Trump supporters view black people as violent. That's compared to 31% of Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton's supporters.
So approximately 50, or half, I should say 50, you have the number there, it's 48. Half of the Trump supporters think that black people are violent. That is a huge number. But just as bad, a third, approximately a third of the Clinton supporters believe that black people are violent. That doesn't sound too progressive to me because it's not true. Well, let's go to the next poll.
47% of Trump supporters believe most blacks are more criminal than whites, compared to 32% of Clinton's supporters.
Again, huge numbers. Approximately half of the Trump supporters believe black people are criminals. But again, a third of the Clinton supporters believe that black people are criminals. Again, that is not in fact the case, just given the population numbers. Now, if you want to factor in the fact that the African American community are heavily targeted, the incarceration rates, the convictions, the bias that the law enforcement agencies have against black people and Hispanics, but we're just talking about black people now, that obviously leads to more arrests. The DAs being as biased, if not more so, the grand juries and the juries obviously with biased as evidenced here, lead to more convictions, and the judges obviously giving out substantially more jail time to African American people that are convicted of crimes versus their white counterparts. Then you see this all over TV, black people do this, black people do that, and it's easy to see how the bias is generated because perception basically becomes reality. Now, there were other polls that were done, and I believe there's going to be another one after this one. So let's continue.
And when it comes to affirmative action, 31% of Trump's voters believe that it discriminates against whites, where only 16% of Clinton supporters believe the same.
All right. That is not quite as bad, but I think that that particular piece got a little bit more manipulated, because the actual polling question was, do social policies such as affirmative action discriminate unfairly against white people? And the overall poll, okay, was 48% agree with that, whereas 36.6% disagree with it, and 15.4% don't know. I would say obviously agreement is very high among Republicans compared to Democrats and independents, and agreement is somewhat higher among men than women. But the actual number of the people polled was 48%. So that tells you where you are specifically.
Here to talk about the poll is Shauna Walcart. Shauna, should the polling
All right, I'm just going to let you know, this is going to kind of cut in and cut out. This wasn't me. This was News One Now having some technical difficulties. So it will cut in and out a little, and then it'll clean up within about 2 or 3 minutes into the video.
Communications Director of Zogby International. Also in the studio today is David Ehrlich, the assistant editor for the Washington Post, as well as Clea Manago, who is the behavioral health expert for the CEO of Black Men's Exchange. Hello, Shauna, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what really struck me about this poll is that, first of all, just the prevalence of racism in America. It's not like his supporters have sort of an overarching prevalence in terms of racism. It seems to me that his supporters are maybe just a little bit more racist than the average racist in America. Is that fair to say?
Well, you know, I think that if we go by what we see in the, one would assume that that is the case. But polls like this are really difficult to sort of decipher. You really need to know what the questions were and to really get a sense as to what the Trump supporters actually, how they actually feel and what they're actually trying to say. So I don't think that was terribly clear, but I think what was clear is that there are still some very persistent, very serious concerns with regards to race. So race still matters.
Definitely, race matters.
Yeah, no, and I think one thing that's interesting about that sound that you played, Avis, is that Donald Trump said black voters want jobs and economic opportunity. he's right about that.
Yeah.
But black voters and black people in this country, we want self-respect as well, and we want to be respected as citizens and as people. And when you have these poll numbers that reflect negative stereotypes held by supporters of Trump, and frankly by some supporters of Hillary Clinton, although less so, as you said, it suggests that, look, you know, we're going to vote based on our wallet, based on our opportunities, but also based on the fact that, look, we are citizens of this country and demand that respect.
But can't we draw a straight line between his racist rhetoric generally, what goes on him in his campaigns, and the type of people that seems to be magnified by his campaign and the results of the poll?
Trump's campaign has been fueled by an us versus them dynamic. Goes back to 2011 and his position as a birther, trying to disprove President Obama's American citizenship, whether it goes to when he launched his campaign talking about Mexican immigrants as rapists, whether he talks about Judge Gonzalo Curiel and saying that he's a Mexican even though he's born in the United States. All those, talking about Muslims, all those things lead to a view among voters of color generally, I think, that say, look, I don't know what Donald Trump thinks in his heart, but I clearly see that he's willing to put a division between people of color and white people, or the mainstream, if you will, in order to get electoral success.
It was so surreal watching that Trump clip, because he's the blackologist of the Republican Party, what blacks want, and this is what they want. His African Americans, he has some, according to him. That's my African American. I don't know if you guys remember
I remember that
clip.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't be surprised by these polls, because from my perspective, you've heard me say many times on the show, this is an anti-black society. The media is very anti-black. The media does not really show us in a positive light. It doesn't show us loving each other, let alone being industrious and just people living a slice of life that's healthy and holistic. It's always some type of stereotypical angle to everything, or it's a comedy. So I think that's going on. But like you mentioned, we don't know what the questions were. And looking at that, I think that's somewhat what happens with black people in this country, which never makes the poll questions in terms of people giving answers, is envy and fear of our greatness.
Sure.
All right, let me stop it there. Again, I went in trying to find out exactly what the questions were, and I couldn't find it as to what the specific questions were. So, yeah, that may have some relevance, but again, I don't think it's going to have as much relevance as the lady that is speaking specifically on the questions believes. It's just an issue. It's an issue. And Cleo basically is bringing up the envy portion of it. And I have my own ideas regarding that. But there was a quote by President Johnson that I thought was pretty significant, and which also has to deal with the racism in this country. And I'm going to bring up that quote basically after this particular segment concludes.
Justin Lynch, the 17-year-old swimmer, just got finished going beyond Michael Phelps with swimming. And then we have the Williams sister. We have all these black people who keep on. And then we have Barack Obama for the past 8 years, who keeps defying the mantra implication in this country that we are lesser and that we are lesser valuable and lesser capable. And some people need that delusion to get up in the morning and feel like they're better, the inferior delusion. And we're constantly defying that. And I think part of what's going on is there's some envy and some confusion, because here comes the media constantly painting this picture, and then reality keeps showing these phenomenal black people. And I think that some what's going on here is really envy and fear and people wanting to replicate us.
Absolutely.
All right, so and it's not going to be the exact quote from President Lyndon Baines Johnson, but basically what he said was, rich people or people in power can pick the pocket of poor white people or white people that aren't in power, as long as they can give them a target to feel better about. i.e., as long as a poor white person, when they wake up every morning, can feel better about themselves than the most affluent black person, that poor white person will basically vote against their own self-interest every single time in order to maintain that feeling.
Or then hate us, but they don't want to articulate that.
Absolutely.
And again, if I can just add, anti-immigration, anti-globalization, but also, you know, it juxtaposes itself against
we
where
have
we're going
to-
with the Supreme Court.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap it, but we will come.
All right, that globalization piece, that's just an excuse because globalization has hurt more white people as far as taking their jobs by sheer number, not percentage, but by sheer number, than black people. Okay, now if you're talking percentage, it probably has hurt us as black people even more than white people because of the lack of ability of black people to determine their own destinies, i.e. in the generation of capital in order to become entrepreneurs, opening up businesses, and expanding economic frontiers. So I'm going to jump back into this in a moment because they were getting ready to go to a commercial.
Very engaging here when I look at the data on this is that we shouldn't feel too good if you are on the progressive side of the coin here, because roughly a third of Hillary Clinton supporters were bold enough to voice basically overtly racist beliefs. And we know that polls in and of themselves are a little tampered because people will say what they feel usually is socially acceptable. Very few people really answer honestly if it's a very controversial subject. So the fact that you have a third of quote unquote progressives expressing overtly racist beliefs and over 40% of Trump supporters, you know, are we in some way even underestimating the level of racism that's in society?
Potentially we could be, but again, Avis, we can't say too much because we don't know what the questions were. So this could be very broad strokes in terms of an analysis on what these supporters are actually thinking. Because 33%, you make a great point, is extremely high to express that sort of sentiment. But I think that also could tie into this notion of even progressive Democrats being concerned about immigration issues and immigration policy and globalization and the economy. It does kind of spill into that notion of some of the very hot kitchen table issues that are going to be that are going on right now.
Okay, now my point's this: because of Trump making it okay to not be politically correct, more and more people are coming out there and actually voicing their opinion. So I think she's wrong. I think that the numbers that are being given are a lot closer to reality than what she may be feeling, realizing, whatever.
Absolutely, but they're asking things like, do you think black people are more violent? Do you think they're more criminally prone? Do you think, are you in favor of or against affirmative action? So there's strong sort of racist undertones.
You bring in the issue of globalization, etc., which is relevant to immigration and things along those lines. And that gets beyond black people. Matter of fact, Latino are typically the poster children in our consciousness of who are most concerned about immigration.
Right.
But what Ava just raised, and this was talking about black people, was violence. And so I wanted to be very specific about how we're being seen and the impression of us that's both in the Republican Party and, in my opinion, a very high number of us in the so-called progressive, that's the word she used, the Democratic Party. Yeah, that's what it really is. And frankly, at the risk of sounding controversial, I don't intend to, but yeah, you do. Hillary called black folks super predators.
Yeah.
Right, yes, she did.
Can I just make a quick jump in on that quick point, Cleo? The number that jumped out at me out of all those numbers, and folks on Twitter, fact check me if I get this wrong off the top of my head, 70% of people responded that were Trump supporters, 70% of Clinton supporters or Democrats said that they wanted to live in a diverse community or neighborhood. I think half that of Trump supporters said they wanted to live in a diverse community. Talking about those things like, are black people violent? Are black people criminal? Those are these deeply embedded stereotypes in our society that you were talking about before the break. When you talk about, it's a little bit of a shift in my mind when you talk about, do I want to live in a diverse neighborhood or community or a society? That's where you see, that's where I saw the most interesting split between Democrats and Republicans, at least in this survey. It doesn't mean that Democrats can't be racist, let's say, or Democrats can't hold stereotypes, but I do think it shows where the parties, at least based on what you talked about, what we talked about here, may diverge a little bit.
How much can we read into that, though?
Not much, because you have to be very careful. Again, I hate to harken back to this issue about the questions. But what's the question?
Well,
Are black people more violent? Are black people more? Yes, we can. We can ask them.
Let's do that.
Yes, that's why it's very important. And I mean, we used to do this all the time when I was at Ivy International. We always sent out with the study the questions that we actually asked. But I just want to add something in. Just think about it.
But if you
what did they ask? Were African
16,000
Americans?
people?
But no. What did they ask? Did they ask, are blacks more violent or aggressive than whites? I mean, think about the types of questions that would glean these kind of responses.
But I'm
That's
saying
very
on the one,
I just got the plane. We'll switch seats in a second. We're just off the plane. Look, here's the deal. This poll clearly shows how prominent race is in America.
Absolutely.
So here's a piece. So we can go through, well, what's the question, how was it asked, also stuff along those lines. But the reality is, we know through other studies, through other surveys, in terms of even how, to your point, how white progressives and how white Democrats feel about this issue as well. So I don't see this Reuters poll just about Donald Trump. The information there about Democrats is as well, because we are still dealing with the issue of race in America.
Absolutely.
We know how some whites also feel when it comes to on the job. Here's the whole question about affirmative action. Okay, it was about affirmative action and minorities. The greatest beneficiary of affirmative action in the history of America, white women. White women who are lawyers and doctors, the reason those professional schools opened up was because of Title IX, 1972. What is Title IX? Provision of the Civil Rights Act. And so when all of a sudden folks say, oh yeah, we don't like affirmative action when it comes to minorities, then ask the question, okay, well how about affirmative action when it comes to white women who are getting contracts on the local, on the state, and the federal government? See, affirmative action is always framed as a minority thing, but white women are always left out. These sort of surveys show the feelings and the beliefs of whites. So when you start going deep inside some of these folks, they have these racial feelings. This is where it comes out.
But Roland, just to add on to that, I think that if we had a series of follow-up questions, I mean, certainly they invoke and they tie into the historical trends that show that race is an issue. We understand that. But I think we would have been able to get more out of this poll had those other questions been asked. The other questions with regards to white women advancing that you just...
But they're not going to ask those questions because the reality is they don't see that as being an actual issue.
Right.
They don't put white women in the category of a racial group to even discuss regarding questions.
Well, the problem is that we don't want to discuss race openly and honestly in America, period. And that's why I believe, as outrageous as these numbers are, I believe it's underreported. We'll be right back if the discussion can...
Yeah, and I agree, but I don't think it's quite as underreported as she thinks it is, only because I believe Donald Trump basically jumping out there has given license for a lot of people to voice their actual opinions. Now, you're going to have some people that absolutely, under no circumstances, are going to want to expose themselves, but there are a lot of people who are. Point in case, the rise in the number of white supremacist groups and the increase in membership, which has been reported and confirmed. Before, those groups tried as much as possible to remain under the radar, but now they're coming out from undercover and publicly expressing their opinions and viewpoints. This has occurred within the last 6.5, 7 years, and I hate to say it, but it's probably more of a reaction to the presidency of Barack Obama than anything else. But yeah, I've done various videos And this particular one, given the poll by Reuters on the subject matter, yeah, racism is alive and well in America.